everybody. I'd like to get started here with our third session, getting the most out of relationships with agencies, attorneys, clients, and vendors. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves.
Thank you, Brent. My name is Dan Regard. I'm the CEO of Intelligent Discovery Solutions. I've been working in electronic discovery as a testifying expert for the last 10 to 15 years. I was formerly the head of electronic discovery globally for LECG. I started and ran the e-discovery practice for FTI Consulting. I see a lot of faces I don't recognize in the audience, but hopefully by the time we finish, we'll know each other a little better.
My name is Catherine Lacho, and I'm an attorney with the law firm of Frost Brown Todd, specialized mainly in labor and employment law, although I dabble, just to keep it interesting, in environmental law, which is where most of my really fun environmental or e-discovery type issues have come up. Oh, I like that. I don't know how to say it.
That one wasn't working.
Okay, so back we go.
The set was fixed.
Oh.
Thank you.
Like watching Survivor.
I'm Molly Morgenstern. I work for Nationwide Insurance, and I work for a group called the Discovery Management Unit. And we are tasked with managing large-scale litigation, regulatory, and whatever other large gathering and assessment needs the enterprise may have. So, though we are an insurance company, we're also a financial institution, some other various companies for whom we also work.
My name is Don McCann. I'm a litigation support analyst for Baker Hostetler in Cleveland, and basically just try to keep us from blowing cases and we're working around with Molly.
And I realized that I failed to introduce myself. I am Brent Griffey. I'm with Frost Brown Todd out of Cincinnati, and I am an electronic discovery analyst, which basically is litigation support. I'd like to start with Dan. What are some of the broad-based efforts underway to improve the methods of cooperation between parties?
Well, I think before we jump into that, let's take one step back and say, why do we need these efforts? We've had such an explosion of volume, of complexity of the computer systems, and quite frankly, the frequency of these issues in litigation, that people are starting to ask, how do we stop reinventing the wheel every single time we walk into a meet and confer? How do we stop reinventing the wheel every time we ask live support for assistance? And so some of the think tanks, some of the thought leadership groups out there, either pre-existing before the rule changes or since, have started putting some meat around those issues. The EDRM, which I know ILTA has embraced quite strongly, is one framework. It's not the only framework, but it's a really great framework for how to talk about the processes we're going through, either between the attorneys and the support groups or between parties in the litigation. So we refer to that quite often. Another area we see for resources is through the Sedona Conference. And the Sedona Conference, from afar, looks like one group, but from the inside really looks like 6 or 7 different groups because they've splintered off into what they call working groups. Is anyone here a member of the Sedona Conference? Juliet, and one hand in the back, great. That's about the population distribution we get across the United States as well. Sedona has one group called Working Group 1, which focuses on domestic electronic discovery issues. They've published a lot of papers, including the original Sedona Principles on Electronic Discovery, which were referred to quite heavily during the changes to the rules in December 2006 and subsequent. Sedona's also started a second group on electronic discovery called Working Group 6. Working Group 6 focuses on the reconciliation between U.S. discovery, which is quite broad, and European privacy, which is quite narrow. And there are a lot of parallels between European privacy and some of the privacy issues we have in the United States, such as HIPAA, other areas of personally identifiable information. And companies are starting to write policies applicable across the world to reconcile how they want to behave in Europe and in the United States together. So those are some interesting areas. Another area I want to make sure I mention is the RFP Plus group, which is also under Sedona. Is anyone here a member of RFP Plus? It's a vendor panel that Sedona's put together to help establish best practices for issuing and responding to RFPs and vocabularies for use when discussing electronic discovery, and LID support services in general. I think it's an interesting resource, especially for this group, because whether you're using it to release RFPs to the people you work with as vendors and consultants and suppliers, or you're using it to establish your own internal processes or vocabulary with the attorneys you're working with, it helps bring everybody to a common lingua franca, which allows us to communicate back and forth and understand what we're exactly saying. And part of what we'll talk about today at some point, I'm hoping, is how even similar words have different definitions. I just got off a conference call discussing deduplication. They said, we have an agreement on deduplication, we know exactly what we're doing. I said, great. Is it between custodians, within custodians, near dupe, full fields, 5 fields? Are you including the time, date, set, or not? And there was silence. You could hear the crickets. So there's not a common definition. We need to start getting to some so that we can facilitate communications and speak quicker. So I think those are some broad-based resources. I'd like to hear what some of the other panelists have to say.
On a particular question asked, because I'm not qualified to speak on a particular question asked.
Well, let me answer you a question, though, indirectly.
Okay, perfect.
Have you had times where you've worked with opposing counsel, or even with your own team, present company excluded, where there's been a feeling you were communicating well, but it turned out later you were not talking about the same thing?
Yes, that was actually one of the major sort of things I was going to emphasize today. In getting ready to come here today, I spoke with everyone I could get my hands on, my law firm, other law firms, on what goes wrong, why does it go wrong, and how do we make it better. And that was one of the big things, was not everyone speaks the same language. And not just from the techno-speak sort of thing, and that's certainly out there. It would have made my life infinitely easier the first time I had an e-discovery issue if someone had asked me, do you want to be able to search these electronically, as opposed to saying, do you want this OCR? Because I'm still pretty sure that OCR stands for Outrageous Cyber Robot. So there's that, and I was reminded recently that it works both ways. Apparently, most folks don't like it when lawyers start speaking in Latin. I don't know why. We think it makes us sound cool, but you all don't like it. But even bigger than that is people make assumptions about basic knowledge, and we forget to remember that maybe we're not even using the most common words the same way. Not too long ago, I called a client of mine and said, listen, I need every email between you and the plaintiff in this case, get them for me. And I knew exactly in my mind what I wanted. I wanted every email with every attachment put on a disk and sent to me. What my client did was go back to his office, sit down, and proceed to spend the next 3 days printing off 10,000 emails. No attachments. And then he put them in a box and he mailed them to me. Well, I knew what email meant. He did not know what email meant. And so we need to work, I think, to be much more precise in our language and understand that maybe the basic knowledge is not the same for everyone, and that we need to be careful to explain things, to ask questions when we don't understand, and to not assume anything.
Molly, do you have a story to share that's similar to this?
For us, as a client, it's almost, the flat answer is no. I don't really have a story because it's natural to assume that when we're talking about our stuff, it would be very unlikely that folks on the outside would know what our stuff is. It's hard to describe a claim file. It's hard to describe the nitty-gritty pieces that we have internally. And so oftentimes we have a natural assumption that you don't know. The problem is that the vendors and the outside law firms come to the table thinking that they do know. They think a claim file is a claim file. If somebody broke their leg, there was a claim, and that's the file. But that's not just the file. There's lots of pieces, parts that go with it. And it's stored in data warehousing, and it's stored in Iron Mountain, and it's stored in a million different places. But if you don't come to the table and let us help you, you're never going to be able to go and acquire that information. So the communication is outside of just saying the same words. It's assuming that not everybody has the same idea of even